It was nearly midnight when I saw the document. The ink was still wet. My signature, except it wasn't mine. The lines were jagged where the pen had hesitated, as if the hand behind it wasn't sure how the letters curved. The paper smelled faintly of the cheap ballpoint ink my father never used, and in the corner of the hospice room my son sat with the will open in front of him, his back to me, shoulders stiff like he'd just been caught with his hand inside a locked drawer. Outside, the hallway lights hummed in that low, electric way hospital fixtures do. Somewhere down the corridor, heart monitor beeped steady. But here, in this dim-lit room, with my father's breath coming shallow under the oxygen mask, I felt something else. A current, sharp and wrong, running beneath everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name's Martin. I'm 61 years old, and this is the truth. The last time I'd seen my father alert enough to hold a conversation was 3 days before. His voice was dry, words clipped, but his eyes still had that same quiet, unflinching weight they always carried. He had been a carpenter most of his life. The kind of man who could plane a plank until it was so smooth you'd swear it had been dipped in oil. He didn't waste movements, didn't waste words. "Martin," he'd said that day, gripping my wrist, "you take care of what's mine. Don't let the wrong hands touch it." At the time, I thought he meant the tools. His shop. Maybe the little plot of land out by the lake where he'd fish alone. I didn't know he meant everything. I didn't know my own son, Evan, had already decided what the wrong hands meant, and that mine were in his way. Evan had been standing at the window when I entered that night. He turned just enough to glance at me, the way you'd glance at a stranger in an elevator. Polite, distant, no warmth. "You're here late," he said. I didn't answer right away. I was looking past him, at the folder on the bed tray. My father's old brass pen lay beside it, the one he kept in his desk at home. But the pen cap was missing, and the ink stain bleeding through the top sheet wasn't his careful hand. It was a mess. I stepped forward, slow. "What's that?" He didn't blink as he replied. "Paperwork Grandpa needed signed. He wanted to make sure things were settled." "Settled?" My voice stayed low, but it was the kind of low that makes people shift their weight. At midnight? I had always known Evan was ambitious. At 34, he had more expensive suits than I'd owned in my life. He liked to remind people he was self-made, though his first big investment had come from a loan I'd taken out against my own home equity. That was a conversation he liked to forget. We hadn't spoken much in the past year except for birthdays and obligatory holidays. But here he was in my father's hospice room holding a pen over a document that bore my name, a name I hadn't put there. He finally moved aside just enough for me to see the header. "Last Will and Testament of Charles L. Harris," and beneath it, in heavy ink, "Martin Harris." My signature, or what he thought was close enough. I shook my head slowly. "You forged my name." He gave a short laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Don't be bradetic. This is what Grandpa wanted. He just didn't have the strength to walk you through it." I looked over at my father. His chest rose and fell under the thin blanket, the oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. His fingers twitched slightly, like he was trying to reach for something in a dream. "Funny," I said. "He didn't mention wanting to cut me out of the estate and hand everything to you. The thing about betrayal is that it's never just the act. It's the years you spent believing the person capable of it wouldn't do it to you." I remembered teaching Evan to ride a bike on the cracked driveway behind our old house. I remembered helping him move into his first apartment, carrying a mattress up 3 flights of stairs while he laughed and complained about the heat. I remembered the look on his face when I handed him the keys to the car I'd saved 2 years to buy for him. And now I was remembering his handwriting from a thank you card he'd sent me once, and how it matched the shaky loops on the paper in front of me. I lowered my voice. "You know forging a signature on a legal document is a felony, right?" He didn't flinch. "By the time anyone cares, it'll be too late. He'll be gone. And you, well, you'll have your share. Just smaller. Cleaner." That last word, cleaner, landed wrong in my ears, like he was talking about a surgical cut, not a theft. I could have ripped the paper out of his hands right then. Could have shouted for the night nurse. But I didn't, because in that moment something in me shifted. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. Not yet. This was going to be a ledger I balanced in my own time. I left the room without another word. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee from the nurse's station. My shoes made a hollow sound on the tile. Somewhere behind me, I heard the soft scrape of a chair leg against the floor. Evan sitting back down. I didn't go home. I went to my truck, pulled out my phone and made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. A man named Walter Kane. Walter used to be an estate attorney before his license was suspended for reasons I didn't ask about. But if you needed someone who understood the shadows between legal and illegal, Walter was your man. He picked up on the third ring. You still work with delicate situations? I asked. There was a pause. Then, depends. Is someone dead yet? I looked back at the hospice building, the single lit window on the third floor. Not yet, I said. By the time I returned the next morning, my father was worse. His breathing rattled, his skin pale under the thin hospital light. Evan was nowhere in sight. The will was gone. I pulled the night nurse aside. Did my son take anything from this room last night? She frowned, thinking. He had a folder, said it was medical paperwork. I thanked her and left before the anger in my jaw made its way to my voice. In my father's final hours, I sat with him in silence. The machines beeped steadily. His hand, calloused from decades of work, rested in mine. There was a flicker in his eyes once, like he was trying to say something, but the effort faded. And then, just like that, the man who had built everything from nothing was gone. The nurse covered him with the sheet. I stood there, my hand still on his arm, my throat burning with words I'd never get to say. When I stepped into the hallway, Evan was waiting. He had the gall to put a hand on my shoulder. It's done, he said quietly. But I knew he wasn't talking about my father's passing. 3 days later, the reading of the will was scheduled. Evan was smug enough to send me a calendar invite, as if this were some kind of corporate meeting. I didn't tell him Walter Kane had also been invited. And Walter had a copy of something Evan would never see coming. The will reading was held in a corner office of Holloway and Denton, a law firm my father had trusted for years. The place smelled of old paper and wood polish, the kind of scent that clung to a space where money and secrets had been handled for decades. Heavy drapes blocked most of the late morning sunlight, leaving the room lit by brass lamps on the long conference table. Evan was already seated when I arrived. He wore his navy suit, the one he liked to wear for serious business. His tie was loose, but the smirk on his face was tight and deliberate. The executor, a man named Gerald, sat at the head of the table with a small stack of papers. Walter Kane sat 2 seats down from me, his gray hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. Evan glanced at him once, then dismissed him. That was his first mistake. Gerald cleared his throat. Gentlemen, we're here to execute the will of Charles L. Harris. The decedent has left specific instructions. Evan leaned forward slightly. I think we can keep this quick. My grandfather wanted the business to transition smoothly, so Gerald raised a hand. Mr. Harris, if you could please let me proceed without interruption. I didn't look at Evan, but I could feel the tension in the way his foot tapped lightly against the floor. The first few pages were straightforward. Small bequests to a handful of charities. My father's fishing boat to an old friend. The contents of his workshop to me. Then Gerald reached the clause about the family estate. That, he said, will pass to Martin Harris in full, along with the adjacent acreage. Evan's eyes flicked to me. The smirk was gone. Gerald turned another page. However, I have here an addendum to the will dated the evening before Mr. Harris's passing, which reallocates certain assets. Walter shifted in his seat, the faint creak of leather breaking the room's stillness. Mr. Denton, before you proceed with that addendum, I'd like to submit something for the record. Evan frowned. Who is this guy? I finally turned to look at him. This is Walter Kane, and you should start paying attention. Walter reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. This, he said, sliding it toward Gerald, is a certified handwriting analysis. Time-stamped from the night in question. It compares Martin Harris's authentic signature with the one on your so-called addendum. Evan's jaw twitched. This is ridiculous. Walter didn't even glance his way. You'll also find a sworn statement from the hospice night nurse confirming that only Mr. Evan Harris handled the document before it left the premises. Gerald's brows knitted as he read. He glanced at the paper, then at Evan, then at me. Mr. Harris, he said slowly, are you suggesting this signature is forged? I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm. I'm not suggesting anything. The evidence speaks for itself. Evan's bravado cracked just enough for a bead of sweat to form at his temple. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin. You can't prove intent. Grandpa wanted me to have. That's enough. Gerald's tone was steel. The addendum will not be accepted as valid. We will proceed under the original will. The sound of the gavel, yes, they actually had one, echoed lightly against the table. And in that moment, Evan knew he'd lost this round. But this wasn't the end. Not even close. After the reading, Evan caught up to me in the hallway. He didn't bother keeping his voice down. "You think you've won," he said, stepping into my path. I shook my head slowly. "This isn't about winning, Evan. This is about you crossing a line you can't uncross." He smirked again, but it was brittle now. Lines can be moved. 2 days later, I learned exactly what he meant. I was in my father's workshop, sorting through boxes of hand tools and half-finished projects, when my neighbor Hank stopped by. "You hear about the zoning petition?" he asked. I frowned. "What petition?" Hank handed me a folded flyer. My father's land, my land, now was being considered for a commercial rezoning. The applicant's name at the bottom? Evan Harris. I called him that evening. He didn't answer, so I drove to his condo downtown. The doorman looked nervous when I arrived. "Mr. Harris," he said, "your son asked me not to let you up without notice." I handed him a business card. "Tell him notice has been given." When Evan finally opened his door, he had a drink in one hand and a smirk on his face. "You drove all the way here for zoning paperwork?" I stepped inside without asking. "You're trying to turn your grandfather's land into some strip mall?" He shrugged. "Better than letting it rot. I've got investors lined up." I lowered my voice. "You're not getting that land, Evan, and if you try to push this through, you'll regret it." He laughed. "You really think you can stop me? The board doesn't care about family drama. They care about development. Money talks." That's when I realized something important. Evan wasn't just arrogant. He was convinced I still played by the same rules as before. He thought I wouldn't go further than warnings. He was wrong. I called Walter again that night. "I need a way to make sure Evan's rezoning dies before it even gets to the board." Walter was quiet for a moment. "I know a city planner with a grudge against developers, and a reporter who owes me a favor." The plan was forming before I even hung up. 1 week later, Evan's name was in the local paper, not for his innovative development, but for his conflict of interest in trying to acquire land tied up in a contested inheritance dispute. The city planning board announced they'd be postponing any rezoning discussions until ownership and legal clarity were established. Evan called me that night. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just said, "This isn't over," and I believed him. What he didn't know was that by the time he called, I had already found something in my father's locked desk drawer, something older than either will but still very much valid in the eyes of the law. It was a deed, and it had my name on it. Not just for the land, for the business too. The deed was dated 15 years ago, long before my father's health had started to decline. His signature was neat and confident, notarized by a man I recognized, an old fishing buddy named Carl Whitman. The paper was thick, the kind that doesn't yellow easily, and it still had the faint smell of the cedar box it had been locked inside. My father had always preferred paper records over digital ones, even as I tried to convince him to get with the times. Now I understood why. This wasn't just a safety net. This was a shield. If Evan wanted to fight over the will, the deed would render his efforts pointless. He couldn't inherit what I already legally owned. But there was more. Written in my father's precise block letters on the back of the folded document was a single sentence. "For Martin. When blood runs thin, paper will hold." I kept the deed to myself. Walter was the only person I told, and even he didn't get to keep a copy. "You're sitting on a gold mine," he said as we drank coffee in his small, dimly lit office. "And I don't mean the land. I mean leverage. If Evan thinks the will is his battleground, let him. While he's fighting there, you'll be closing the other door on him, without him even seeing it." I nodded. "I'm not showing my hand until I have to." Walter smirked. "That's the right play, but be ready. Desperate men do stupid things." That stupid thing came faster than I expected. 2 nights later, I was woken by my phone buzzing at 2:17 a.m. It was Hank, my neighbor. "Martin, you need to get down here," he said. "Your dad's workshop, there's a moving truck out front. Some guys are hauling stuff out." I was in my truck before he could say more. When I pulled up, I saw exactly what he meant. The workshop door was wide open, the overhead light spilling across the gravel drive. Inside, 2 men in work gloves were stacking crates into the back of a truck with no company logo. And standing beside them, wearing that same damned navy suit jacket, was Evan. I killed the engine, stepped out, and called across the yard. "You mind telling me what you're doing?" Evan didn't even look embarrassed. "Salvaging what I can before the place falls apart. These tools are worth money." "They're not yours," I said. He tilted his head, smug. "Neither's the land, technically, until probate is done." I took a step closer. You touch another box and I'll call the sheriff. And when they show up, I'll make sure they see the footage. Footage? His smirk faltered. I nodded toward the small camera mounted above the workshop door. My father had installed it years ago after some kids tried breaking in. I'd kept it running ever since. Evan muttered something under his breath and signaled for the men to stop. One of them glanced between us, clearly unsure if he was about to get arrested. "This isn't over," Evan said again, stepping past me toward the truck cab. I didn't move until the taillights were swallowed by the dark. Back inside the workshop, I checked the camera feed. Sure enough, every second of his little midnight operation was recorded in crisp, time-stamped detail. The next morning I took the footage to Walter. "Beautiful," he said, smiling in that slow way lawyers do when they know the other side just made their own noose. Breaking and entering, attempted theft, all while the estate is in legal review. If the probate judge sees this, Evan's claim won't just be weakened, it'll be radioactive. But Walter wasn't done. "If you really want to shut this down, we can use this to open a different case, one that forces him to the negotiating table before the will hearing even concludes." "What kind of case?" I asked. "Civil conversion, basically trying to take property he knew wasn't his. That lets us freeze his assets while it's pending." The idea appealed to me more than I wanted to admit. Evan had always lived beyond his means. Expensive cars, condo in the city, vacations that looked like they were designed to be posted online. If those accounts were frozen, he'd be suffocating within weeks. Still, part of me hesitated. "He's my son," I said quietly. Walter's expression didn't soften. "Then maybe it's time he learned what that used to mean." I filed the suit the next day. The court moved faster than I expected. By the end of the week, Evan's accounts were locked pending review. And sure enough, my phone lit up that night. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What the hell did you do?" I kept my tone even. "Protected what's mine. You can't just—" "I can, and I did. Now you've got a choice. Drop the probate fight, walk away with whatever's left in your savings when the freeze lifts, or keep pushing and watch the rest of your life get carved up in court." He didn't answer right away. I could hear the background hum of the city through his phone, the occasional honk of traffic. Finally he said, "You think you've got me cornered. But you don't know everything, Dad." The line went dead. The next morning I found out what he meant. A letter arrived from the county clerk's office. Evan had filed a challenge to the deed, claiming it had been signed under undue influence, and that my father hadn't been of sound mind at the time. It was a bold move, and it meant he wasn't just willing to drag me through court. He was willing to drag my father's memory through the mud to get what he wanted. That night I went back to my father's cedar box. There was something else inside, a smaller envelope I hadn't noticed before, sealed with red wax. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed my father, Carl Whitman, and myself, standing in the yard with the deed in my father's hand, the date written in marker on the back. It wasn't just a keepsake, it was proof. And proof in the right hands could become a weapon. I sat there with the Polaroid in my hand for a long time. The edges curled slightly from years pressed between paper. The date on the back, June 14, 2008, was in my father's steady block handwriting. The same I'd seen on blueprints, grocery lists, and every note he ever left me. Carl Whitman's broad grin was visible in the photo, his arm slung over my father's shoulder, and me, younger, with more hair and less gray, standing beside them holding the deed like it was some kind of championship trophy. It was the kind of image you couldn't fake, not with the lighting, the shadows, the grainy texture of instant film. And I knew right then if Evan wanted to challenge my father's competence on that day, this picture would blow his argument to dust. Walter came by the next morning, coffee in one hand, reading glasses perched low on his nose. I slid the Polaroid across the table. He looked at it for maybe 3 seconds before smiling. "This is checkmate." I raised an eyebrow. "It's just a picture." "It's a picture," he said, with 2 notarized witnesses still alive. "You and Carl. It's dated. It's physical evidence of your father's mental clarity on the exact day the deed was signed. In court, this isn't just proof. It's a sledgehammer." I agreed to let Walter handle it his way, but I wanted to be there when the blow landed. The preliminary hearing on Evan's challenge was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The courtroom was small, with polished wooden benches and a faint smell of old varnish. Evan sat at the petitioner's table in another tailored suit, his tie knotted perfectly. He looked funfant, maybe even a little cocky. His attorney, some young guy with slicked back hair and too much cologne, kept flipping through a binder like it was going to save them. When the judge called the case, Evan's lawyer launched into a speech about undue influence and diminished capacity. He painted a picture of my father as a confused old man who could barely remember my name, much less make binding legal decisions. I let him talk. When it was our turn, Walter stood and walked to the evidence table. "Your Honor," he began, "the petitioner claims Mr. Charles Harris was not of sound mind on June 14, 2008. I'd like to submit Exhibit A." He held up the Polaroid, the glossy square catching the light. This photograph was taken on the exact day in question. It shows Mr. Harris holding the deed in question, flanked by both witnesses to the signing, himself and Mr. Carl Whitman, who has provided a sworn statement verifying the events. The date is handwritten by Mr. Harris on the reverse side. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have included an affidavit from a licensed physician who examined Mr. Harris 2 days after this photo and found no signs of cognitive impairment. The judge took the photo, studied it, and then looked at Evan's lawyer. "Do you have any rebuttal evidence?" The young attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Not at this time, Your Honor." Evan's jaw tightened. Then the judge said, "The challenge is dismissed with prejudice. The deed stands." The gavel came down with a single final crack. Outside the courtroom, Evan caught up to me. His voice was low, dangerous. "You think this is over?" "You've embarrassed me in front of the board, the court." I cut him off. "You embarrassed yourself. I just let the truth speak louder than your lies." He took a step closer. "You'll regret this." I met his gaze without blinking. "No, Evan, you will." For a few days things went quiet. Too quiet. I focused on clearing out my father's workshop, sorting tools and lumber, deciding what to keep and what to donate. It was almost peaceful, until I noticed something strange one afternoon. The lock on the workshop door had been scratched, fresh grooves around the keyhole. Inside, nothing seemed missing. But on the workbench, a single sheet of paper lay in the center. No note, no signature. Just a blank page with one corner burned. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. That night I installed new locks, heavy-duty ones, and added another camera above the side entrance. But deep down I knew the paper was just a prelude. Evan wasn't going to try another forgery or a public zoning move. He was going to come at me from an angle I couldn't predict. And he didn't keep me waiting. A week later I was at the county recorder's office filing some final paperwork, when the clerk looked up from her screen with a puzzled expression. "Mr. Harris, it says here you've submitted a quitclaim deed, transferring the property to a holding company." I stared at her. "I haven't submitted anything." She turned the monitor so I could see. Sure enough, my name, my supposed signature, the company name Harris Development LLC. Evan's fingerprints were all over it. I called Walter from the parking lot. "He's getting bolder," Walter said, "and sloppier. If he actually filed that, he's looking at another felony. But we can use this." "How?" I asked. "We don't just block it. We set a trap. We let him think it's going through, then catch him in the act of trying to leverage it with a buyer." I could almost hear Walter smiling on the other end. "I've got just the guy to pose as that buyer." For the next 3 days I played my part. I didn't challenge the quitclaim immediately. I didn't call Evan. I let the silence do the work. And sure enough, on the 4th day Walter called me with the update. He took the bait. "He's meeting our buyer tomorrow at 3 p.m. at a café downtown. Bring your camera." I knew then this wasn't just going to be a legal victory. It was going to be the kind of win that left a scar. The café was one of those trendy downtown places with exposed brick, Edison bulbs, and the faint smell of roasted beans that lingered even after the morning rush had ended. I arrived early, choosing a booth in the corner with a clear view of the door. Walter's buyer was already there. A man named Colin Briggs, a former real estate consultant who'd done undercover work before. He had a crisp folder on the table, a pen clipped neatly inside, and a relaxed air that made him look exactly like someone ready to drop serious money on prime property. At 2:57 p.m. Evan walked in. He was wearing another tailored suit, but this one was darker, sharper. His smile when he spotted Colin was the kind you wear when you think you've outplayed everyone else in the room. I kept my head down, pretending to scroll through my phone. The tiny camera in my jacket button was live, streaming to a secure drive Walter had set up. They shook hands and Colin wasted no time. "So, Mr. Harris, I understand you've got control of some acreage and a workshop property. Prime location. What's the asking price?" Evan slid a manila envelope across the table. "Market value. But I'm flexible if we can close quickly. My father's stepping back from things, so I'm consolidating assets." Colin nodded, playing along. "And you have the deed in your name?" Evan smirked. As of last week, paperwork's been filed with the county, it's clean. That was my cue. I stood, walked over, and slid into the booth beside Colin. Evan's face went slack. What the hell are you? I cut him off. Go ahead. Tell him again how clean the paperwork is. Colin leaned back, eyes flicking between us. Something I should know? I reached into my jacket and pulled out a copy of the real deed, the one my father had signed in 2008. I placed it on the table beside the quitclaim Evan had forged. The contrast between the two signatures was glaring. This, I said to Colin, is the legal deed. This, I tapped the quitclaim, is a felony in progress. Evan tried to grab the papers, but Colin's hand shot out, pinning them in place. You set me up, Evan hissed. No, I said calmly. You set yourself up. I just made sure someone was watching when you did it. Two uniformed officers walked into the café then, moving with that quiet authority you only see from people who know exactly why they're there. Walter had arranged for them to be nearby, just in case. One of them stepped up to the booth. Evan Harris? Evan's jaw clenched. Yeah, you're under arrest for forgery, attempted fraud, and filing false documents with a county office. The cuffs clicked shut. The room went quiet except for the scrape of the chair as they pulled him to his feet. As they led him past me, he didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said enough. Rage, humiliation, and that deep, sinking realization that he'd finally hit a wall he couldn't climb over. 2 months later, the legal mess was untangled. The court upheld my sole ownership of the land and the workshop. Evan took a plea deal. Probation, fines, and a permanent mark on his record. We haven't spoken since. Some nights I walk out to the workshop and stand in the doorway looking at the tools lined neatly on the walls. The cedar scent is still there, faint but present, like my father's voice in the back of my mind. I keep the Polaroid framed on the workbench. Not as a trophy, not even as a warning, but as a reminder. Because my father was right. When blood runs thin, paper will hold. And sometimes the best way to honor the man who built everything is to make sure the wrong hands never touch it. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.